Close your eyes and let the wind carry you across endless grasslands, where the horizon stretches forever in every direction and the sky is so vast it feels like you could fall upward into its infinite blue. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wild grass and horses, the smoke of distant campfires, the promise of adventure beyond the next hill. You are entering the world of the Mongols, a world of fierce warriors and brilliant strategists, of brutal conquests and surprising tolerance, of an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna. At the center of this world stands one man, born with a blood clot clutched in his tiny fist, a sign that he was destined for greatness. His birth name was TEMÜJIN, but the world would come to know him by another name, a title that still echoes through history 800 years later. Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The man who created the largest contiguous land empire in human history, who killed millions yet united warring tribes, who destroyed cities yet established religious freedom, who could neither read nor write yet created a legal code that governed half the known world. Tonight, as you drift toward peaceful sleep, we will explore the extraordinary story of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire, from the harsh steppes where he was born to the distant lands his descendants conquered. Let your breathing slow and your body relax as we journey through one of the most dramatic and consequential chapters in human history. Fact 1. Genghis Khan was born around 1162 CE on the banks of the Onon River in what is now Mongolia, though the exact date is uncertain. His father, Yasujii, was the chieftain of a small Mongol tribe called the Börte. His mother, Holon, had been kidnapped from another tribe on her wedding day, a common practice among the steppe peoples. The boy was named TEMÜJIN, possibly after a Tatar chieftain his father had recently defeated. According to legend, he was born clutching a blood clot in his right hand, an omen interpreted as a sign that he would become a great warrior. Fact 2. The Mongolian steppe, where TEMÜJIN was born and raised, is one of the harshest environments on Earth. Summers bring scorching heat, while winters bring temperatures that plunge to 40 below zero. The land is too dry for farming, so the people who lived there survived as nomadic herders, moving their camps to follow grazing for their horses, sheep, goats, and cattle. This harsh existence bred tough, resilient people who could ride almost before they could walk, and who learned to survive hardship that would break softer peoples. Fact 3. Horses were the foundation of Mongol life and the key to Mongol military success. Mongol children learned to ride at age 3 or 4, and by adulthood, they were among the finest horsemen in the world. Each Mongol warrior typically traveled with 3 to 5 horses, allowing them to switch mounts and cover extraordinary distances without exhausting their animals. Mongol horses were small but incredibly tough, able to survive on sparse grazing and endure harsh conditions that would kill larger breeds. The bond between a Mongol and his horses was sacred. Fact 4. TEMÜJIN's childhood was marked by tragedy and hardship. When he was about 9 years old, his father was poisoned by Tatars, a rival tribe, leaving the family vulnerable. The tribe that had followed Yasujii abandoned his widow and children, refusing to be led by a boy. Holon and her children were left to survive alone on the harsh steppe, gathering wild foods, hunting small game, and enduring desperate poverty. These years of struggle forged TEMÜJIN's character, teaching him self-reliance, determination, and the harsh realities of a world without mercy. Fact 5. During these difficult years, TEMÜJIN killed his half-brother Börte in a dispute over hunting spoils. According to the secret history of the Mongols, a 13th century account of Mongol origins, TEMÜJIN and his full brother Kasar stalked and shot Börte with arrows. When Holan learned what her sons had done, she was furious, comparing them to wild animals. This early act of violence reveals the brutal world in which TEMÜJIN lived, where survival often required ruthlessness and where family bonds were complicated by competition for scarce resources. Fact 6. Let yourself drift now across the endless grasslands, where the only sounds are the wind in the grass and the distant thunder of hooves. This is the world that made Genghis Khan, a world where strength and cunning determined who lived and who died, where loyalty was the highest virtue and betrayal the worst sin. In this harsh school, a boy named TEMÜJIN learned the lessons that would one day allow him to conquer the world. The steppe was his teacher, hardship his classroom, survival his first and most important lesson. Fact 7. As a young man, TEMÜJIN was captured by a rival clan called the TEMÜJIN and forced to wear a wooden collar, a humiliating form of imprisonment. He escaped with the help of a sympathetic family who risked their lives to hide him. This experience deepened TEMÜJIN's understanding of loyalty and betrayal, themes that would define his later rule. He never forgot those who helped him in his hour of need, and he never forgave those who wronged him. His capacity for both gratitude and vengeance became legendary. Fact 8. TEMÜJIN's first wife, Börte, was kidnapped by the Merkits, a rival tribe, shortly after their marriage. She was held captive for several months and may have been given to a Merkit warrior as a wife. TEMÜJIN gathered allies, including his blood brother Jamukha and the powerful chieftain Togrul, and launched a raid to rescue her. Börte was recovered, but she was pregnant, and there was always uncertainty about whether her first son, Joki, was TEMÜJIN's child or the result of her captivity. This uncertainty would later cause conflict among TEMÜJIN's descendants. Fact 9. The rescue of Börte demonstrated TEMÜJIN's growing ability to form alliances and coordinate military action. Throughout his rise to power, he showed a genius for diplomacy as well as warfare, knowing when to fight and when to negotiate, when to show mercy, and when to be ruthless. He attracted followers not just through strength, but through his reputation for loyalty to those who served him faithfully. In a world of shifting allegiances and constant betrayal, TEMÜJIN offered something rare, a leader who kept his promises. Fact 10. TEMÜJIN's blood brotherhood with Jamukha, established in their youth, eventually turned to bitter rivalry. As both men gained power and followers, they became competitors for leadership of the Mongol tribes. Their conflict culminated in several battles, with fortune favoring first one and then the other. When TEMÜJIN finally triumphed, Jamukha was captured and brought before him. According to the secret history, TEMÜJIN offered his former blood brother a chance to renew their friendship, but Jamukha chose death, asking only that he be killed without the shedding of blood, an honorable death by Mongol standards. Fact 11. The Mongol method of executing nobles without shedding blood, considered more honorable than bloody death, typically involved wrapping the victim in a carpet and having horses trample him, or breaking his back. Blood was sacred to the Mongols, believed to contain the soul, so spilling it was spiritually polluting. This seemingly paradoxical combination of mass slaughter in warfare with concern about proper execution methods illustrates the complex Mongol worldview, where violence was commonplace but governed by strict codes of honor and propriety. Fact 12. By 1206 CE, TEMÜJIN had defeated or absorbed all rival tribes on the Mongolian steppe. A great assembly called a Kurultai was convened, where the leaders of the united tribes proclaimed him Genghis Khan. The exact meaning of this title is debated, but it is usually translated as universal ruler or oceanic ruler, suggesting dominion as vast as the sea. At approximately 44 years old, the former outcast who had survived on roots and rodents now ruled all the peoples of the felt-walled tents, as the Mongols described themselves. Fact 13. The unification of the Mongol tribes under Genghis Khan was an unprecedented achievement. For centuries, the steppe peoples had been divided into constantly warring clans and tribes, their energy dissipated in internal conflicts. By bringing them together under a single leader and a common law, Genghis Khan created a military force of extraordinary power. The same warriors who had fought each other now turned their combined strength outward against the wealthy civilizations that surrounded them. The world was about to change forever. Fact 14. Genghis Khan reorganized Mongol society on military lines, breaking up traditional tribal structures and reassigning people to units based on decimal organization. The basic unit was the arban, a squad of 10 soldiers. 10 arbans formed a zun of 100. 10 zuns formed a mingan of 1,000. 10 minghans formed a tumun of 10,000. This system broke old tribal loyalties and created new ones based on military units, ensuring that soldiers were loyal to the Khan rather than to their traditional chiefs. Fact 15. Rest now in the vast silence of the steppe, where the stars wheel overhead in numbers beyond counting. The Mongols called the sky the eternal blue heaven and believed it watched over them, blessing their conquests and guiding their destiny. Genghis Khan claimed to rule by the mandate of heaven, appointed to bring all peoples under one rule. Whether you see him as a monster or a genius, a destroyer or a unifier, his impact on history is undeniable. He reshaped the world, and the world has never forgotten. Fact 16. The Mongol military was perhaps the most effective fighting force the world had ever seen. Every Mongol male was a warrior from childhood, trained in riding, archery, and survival skills. The composite bow used by Mongol warriors could shoot accurately at 300 yards while riding at full gallop, a feat that seemed almost supernatural to their enemies. Mongol armies could cover up to 100 miles in a single day, appearing suddenly where they were least expected and vanishing before enemies could respond. Fact 17. Mongol military tactics combined mobility, firepower, and psychological warfare in devastating combinations. A favorite tactic was the feigned retreat, where Mongol forces would pretend to flee in disorder, drawing enemies into pursuit. When the enemy forces were stretched out and disorganized, the Mongols would suddenly turn and counterattack, often with fresh troops that had been hidden in reserve. This tactic worked repeatedly because enemies simply could not believe that Mongol warriors would actually flee, making the deception convincing. Fact 18. The Nurj, or Great Hunt, was both a training exercise and a military operation that demonstrated Mongol organizational capabilities. Thousands of warriors would spread out across hundreds of miles, forming a vast circle that slowly contracted, driving all game animals toward the center. This required precise coordination, communication across vast distances, and discipline to maintain the line without gaps. The Nurj taught skills directly applicable to warfare: encirclement, communication, and coordinated movement of large forces. Fact 19. Genghis Khan's military success depended heavily on intelligence and espionage. Before attacking any target, he sent spies and merchants to gather information about enemy strengths, weaknesses, political divisions, and geography. He knew which cities had strong walls and which had weak defenders, which rulers were popular and which were hated. This intelligence allowed him to plan campaigns with precision, exploiting enemy vulnerabilities and avoiding traps. Information was as important to Mongol conquest as arrows and horses. Fact 20. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire, beginning in 1219 CE, demonstrated Genghis Khan's strategic genius and his capacity for terrible vengeance. The invasion was triggered when the governor of the Khwarezmian city of Otrar massacred a Mongol trade caravan and killed Mongol ambassadors, a profound insult that Genghis Khan could not ignore. What followed was one of the most devastating military campaigns in history, resulting in the deaths of millions and the destruction of some of the most prosperous cities in the Islamic world. Fact 21. The Khwarezmian Empire, ruled by Shah Muhammad II, stretched across modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia with a population of perhaps 40 million people. On paper, the Shah commanded armies far larger than anything Genghis Khan could muster. But the Khwarezmian forces were scattered across a vast territory, and Muhammad made the fatal decision to disperse them to defend individual cities rather than concentrating them for a decisive battle. This allowed the Mongols to defeat his armies piecemeal. Fact 22. Genghis Khan divided his forces into multiple columns that attacked the Khwarezmian Empire from different directions simultaneously, making it impossible for defenders to know where the main blow would fall. One force under his general Jeeb crossed supposedly impassable mountains to attack from an unexpected direction. Another force pinned down Khwarezmian armies in one region while the main Mongol army swept through another. The coordination of forces across thousands of miles, in an age without telecommunications, was a remarkable achievement. Fact 23. The siege and destruction of the city of Urgench, the Khwarezmian capital, in 1221 CE was one of the bloodiest episodes of the Mongol conquests. The city resisted fiercely, and the Mongols suffered heavy casualties in street-by-street fighting. When Urgench finally fell, the Mongols massacred the population in revenge. Some accounts claim that each Mongol soldier was assigned 24 civilians to kill. The city was then flooded by diverting the Amu Darya River. Urgench never recovered its former glory. Fact 24. Let the weight of history settle gently around you now. The Mongol conquest brought death on a scale that is difficult to comprehend, perhaps 40 million people killed across decades of warfare. Yet history is never simple. The same conquests that caused such devastation also created connections across continents, spread technologies and ideas, and established a peace across Eurasia that allowed unprecedented exchange. The Mongol legacy, like the man who created it, resists easy judgment. Fact 25. The city of Merv, in present-day Turkmenistan, may have been the single worst massacre of the Mongol conquests. Merv was one of the largest cities in the world, with a population that may have exceeded 1 million. When it surrendered to the Mongols in 1221 CE, the inhabitants were promised safety but were then marched out of the city and systematically slaughtered. The Persian historian Javani, writing a generation later, claimed that 700,000 people were killed, though modern historians debate the accuracy of such figures. Fact 26. The Mongols used terror deliberately as a weapon of war. By gaining a reputation for merciless destruction of cities that resisted, they encouraged other cities to surrender without fighting. A city that opened its gates might be spared. A city that resisted would be destroyed, as an example to others. This calculated use of terror was militarily effective, allowing relatively small Mongol forces to conquer vast territories by breaking enemy will to resist. The psychological impact of Mongol reputation often preceded the actual armies. Fact 27. Not all Mongol conquests were purely destructive. Genghis Khan recognized the value of skilled craftsmen, engineers, and administrators, and these were often spared during conquests and put to work serving the empire. Chinese siege engineers helped the Mongols overcome fortified cities. Persian administrators helped govern conquered territories. Scholars, artists, and religious figures were frequently protected. The Mongols were pragmatic above all, destroying what threatened them but preserving what could be useful. Fact 28. Genghis Khan established a legal code called the Yasa that governed Mongol society and the empire. The Yasa covered everything from military organization to criminal punishment, from religious tolerance to diplomatic protocol. Many of its provisions are known only from later descriptions, as no complete text has survived. The Yasa established principles including religious freedom, immunity for diplomats and merchants, promotion based on merit rather than birth, and severe punishments for theft, adultery, and betrayal. Its enforcement helped maintain order across the empire. Fact 29. Religious tolerance was a remarkable feature of the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan himself followed traditional Mongol shamanism, believing in the eternal blue heaven and various nature spirits. But he exempted religious leaders of all faiths from taxation and military service, met with leaders of various religions, and forbade his followers from favoring one religion over others. The Mongol Empire included Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, Confucians, and others, all practicing their faiths freely under Mongol rule. Fact 30. This religious tolerance was partly pragmatic, as it helped maintain peace in a diverse empire, but it also reflected genuine Mongol beliefs. The Mongols believed that there were many paths to the divine and that offending any god was dangerous. They also believed that religious figures had spiritual power that should not be antagonized. Whatever the motivation, the result was an empire where a Catholic friar from Europe could travel safely to the Mongol capital and debate theology with Buddhist monks and Muslim scholars. Fact 31. Genghis Khan died in 1227 CE during a campaign against the Tangut people of Xia in northwestern China. The exact cause of his death is unknown, with various accounts attributing it to a fall from a horse, an arrow wound, illness, or other causes. He was approximately 65 years old and had spent most of his adult life in warfare. According to his wishes, his death was kept secret until military operations were completed, and soldiers killed anyone who witnessed the funeral procession to keep the burial site hidden. Fact 32. The location of Genghis Khan's tomb remains one of history's great mysteries. According to legend, those who buried him were killed, and then those who killed them were killed, ensuring that no one could reveal the location. The funeral procession may have ridden horses over the grave to conceal it, or a river may have been diverted over it. Numerous expeditions have searched for the tomb, but it has never been found. Mongolians today consider the search disrespectful and believe the tomb should remain undiscovered. Fact 33. Rest now in the mystery of the unknown tomb, where the conqueror of the world sleeps in a secret place beneath the endless steppe. The man who commanded armies of hundreds of thousands lies alone in the earth, his location known only to the spirits of the sky and the grass that grows above him. All his power, all his conquests, all his glory came to this, a hidden grave in an unknown location, undisturbed for 8 centuries. Even in death, Genghis Khan keeps his secrets. Fact 34. Before his death, Genghis Khan divided his empire among his 4 sons by his first wife Börte. The eldest, Joki, received the westernmost territories, though he died shortly before his father. The second son, Chagatai, received Central Asia. The third son, Ogedai, was chosen as the next great Khan and received the Mongol homeland plus northern China. The youngest son, Talyuri, received the smallest territory but the largest share of the army, as was Mongol custom. This division would eventually lead to the empire's fragmentation. Fact 35. Ogedai Khan, who ruled from 1229 to 1241 CE, continued his father's conquests and oversaw the completion of the Mongol conquest of northern China. He also launched the Great Western Campaign that brought Mongol armies to the borders of Western Europe. Ogedai was known for his generosity and his love of drinking, which eventually killed him. He established the Mongol capital at Karakoram and built roads and postal stations that connected the vast empire. Fact 36. The Mongol postal system, called the Yam, was one of the most efficient communication networks in the pre-modern world. Relay stations were established at intervals of about 25 miles across the empire, where messengers could obtain fresh horses and supplies. Urgent messages could travel over 200 miles per day, allowing information to cross the empire far faster than any army could march. The Yam also served travelers on official business, including diplomats and merchants, who could obtain food and lodging at the stations. Fact 37. The Great Western Campaign, launched in 1236 CE under the command of Börte Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, brought Mongol armies into Europe. The Mongols conquered the Russian principalities, destroying Kiev in 1240 CE and establishing dominion over Russia that would last over 2 centuries. They then invaded Poland and Hungary, defeating European armies at the battles of Legnica and Mohi in 1241 CE. Europe lay open before them, but then the Mongols suddenly withdrew. Fact 38. The Mongol withdrawal from Europe was caused by the death of Ogedai Khan in December 1241 CE. Mongol custom required that all princes of the blood return to Mongolia to participate in the selection of the next great Khan. Börte Khan turned his armies back, and Europe was spared further invasion. This accident of timing may have changed world history. Had the Mongols continued their advance, they might well have conquered all of Europe, fundamentally altering the subsequent development of Western civilization. Fact 39. The Mongol defeat of European armies at Legnica and Mohi shattered the myth of European military superiority. The heavily armored knights who dominated European warfare were helpless against Mongol tactics. At Mohi, the Mongols used smoke screens, feigned retreats, and encirclement to destroy the Hungarian army, killing an estimated 65,000 soldiers. European observers were shocked by the sophistication of Mongol warfare and the discipline of Mongol troops. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for such an enemy. Fact 40. The Golden Horde, as Börte Khan's domain in Russia and the Western steppe came to be known, dominated Russia for nearly 2.5 centuries. Russian princes were required to travel to the Mongol court to receive patents authorizing their rule, and they paid heavy tribute to their Mongol overlords. This period of Mongol domination, called the Tatar yoke, had profound effects on Russian development, including the centralization of power, the development of autocratic government, and Russia's relative isolation from Western Europe. Fact 41. Let yourself float now through the centuries of Mongol rule, when the horsemen of the steppe dominated the largest empire the world had ever seen. From Korea to Poland, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf, the Mongol peace allowed travelers and merchants to move safely across continents. A merchant could travel from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, passing through lands of different languages, religions, and cultures, but all under the protection of Mongol law. This was the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Fact 42. The Mongol conquest of China was completed by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, who established the Yuan dynasty in 1271 CE. Kublai Khan ruled from a magnificent new capital at what is now Beijing, surrounded by Chinese advisors and administrators. He attempted to invade Japan twice, in 1274 and 1281, but both invasion fleets were destroyed by typhoons that the Japanese called kamikaze, or divine winds. Despite these failures, Kublai Khan presided over one of the wealthiest and most powerful states in the world. Fact 43. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who traveled to China and served in Kublai Khan's court for 17 years, left the most famous European account of the Mongol Empire. His descriptions of China's wealth, cities, and technologies amazed and sometimes disbelieved European readers. He described paper money, coal, postal systems, and other innovations unknown in Europe. Whether all of Marco Polo's claims are accurate has been debated for centuries, but his account opened European eyes to the sophisticated civilizations of the East. Fact 44. The Mongol Empire facilitated unprecedented exchange across Eurasia. Technologies including gunpowder, printing, and the compass spread from China to the West. Crops and agricultural techniques spread in both directions. Ideas about government, religion, and science crossed cultural boundaries. Artists, craftsmen, and scholars traveled between distant parts of the empire. The Mongol conquests were devastating, but the peace that followed enabled a flowering of exchange that shaped the modern world. Fact 45. The Black Death, the devastating plague pandemic that killed perhaps 1/3 of Europe's population in the 14th century, may have spread along Mongol trade routes from Central Asia. The bacterium Yersinia pestis probably originated in rodent populations in the steppe and spread westward with travelers and merchants. When Mongol forces besieging the Crimean city of Kaffa catapulted plague-infected corpses over the walls, they may have contributed to the pandemic's arrival in Europe. The connections that facilitated trade also facilitated disease. Fact 46. The Mongol Empire began to fragment after the death of Monk Khan in 1259 CE. Different branches of Genghis Khan's family ruled different portions of the empire, and these branches increasingly went their own ways. The Yuan dynasty in China, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Golden Horde in Russia all pursued their own interests, sometimes cooperating but often conflicting. By the 14th century, the unified empire existed only in theory. Fact 47. Rest in the twilight of empire now, when the great realm built by Genghis Khan slowly dissolved into separate kingdoms. All empires end. This is the law of history. But the Mongol Empire left marks on the world that endure to this day. The nations that arose from its fragments, the trade routes it established, the ideas it spread, the populations it reshaped, all these continue to influence our world. Genghis Khan has been dead for 8 centuries, but his shadow still falls across the map. Fact 48. The Ilkhanate, the Mongol successor state that ruled Persia and the Middle East, converted to Islam in 1295 under the Khan Ghazan. This marked a major shift, as the Mongol rulers adopted the religion of their subjects and began to assimilate into Persian culture. The Ilkhanate patronized Persian art and literature, producing some of the finest illustrated manuscripts in Islamic history. The synthesis of Mongol and Persian traditions created a distinctive cultural flowering. Fact 49. The Yuan dynasty in China lasted until 1368, when it was overthrown by the Ming dynasty. The Mongol rulers never fully won the acceptance of the Chinese population, who resented foreign domination. Natural disasters, economic problems, and rebellions weakened Mongol control. When a Chinese peasant rebel named Zhu Yuanzong captured the capital and proclaimed the Ming dynasty, the Mongols retreated to the steppe. Their century of rule in China left lasting influences, but they were never fully Sinicized. Fact 50. Tamerlane, also known as Timur, was a 14th century conqueror who claimed descent from Genghis Khan and sought to rebuild the Mongol Empire. Rising from Central Asia, Tamerlane created an empire stretching from India to Turkey, defeating the Ottoman Sultan and the Sultan of Delhi. His conquests were marked by the same mixture of military brilliance and terrible destruction that characterized Genghis Khan's wars. Tamerlane was the last of the great steppe conquerors, a final echo of Mongol power. Fact 51. The Mongol Empire, which ruled much of India from the 16th to the 19th century, was founded by Babur, a descendant of both Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. The name Mughal itself is derived from Mongol. Though the Mughals were culturally Persian and Turkish rather than Mongol, they trace their legitimacy to their descent from the great conqueror. The Taj Mahal, built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, is thus a distant echo of Genghis Khan's legacy. Fact 52. Modern Mongolia honors Genghis Khan as the founder of the nation. His image appears on currency, his name adorns the main airport and countless businesses, and a massive statue of him on horseback towers over the landscape outside the capital, Ulaanbaatar. For Mongolians, he represents national identity and pride, the greatest figure in their history. The brutality of his conquests is acknowledged, but placed in historical context, alongside his achievements in unifying the Mongol people. Fact 53. In other countries, Genghis Khan's legacy is more complicated. In China, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other lands that suffered Mongol devastation, his name often evokes horror rather than admiration. The destruction of cities like Baghdad, which was sacked by the Mongols in 1258 with enormous loss of life, and the destruction of its legendary libraries, remains a painful memory. Different peoples remember the same historical figure in very different ways, depending on their own historical experience. Fact 54. Let yourself consider now the complexity of historical judgment. Was Genghis Khan a monster who murdered millions or a genius who united nations? Was he a destroyer of civilizations or a builder of empires? Was he cruel beyond measure or merely ruthless in a ruthless age? Perhaps he was all of these things, for human beings, especially great ones, resist simple categories. History gives us facts. Meaning is something we construct from those facts according to our own values and perspectives. Fact 55. Genetic studies have suggested that Genghis Khan may have millions of descendants alive today. A distinctive Y chromosome pattern found in approximately 8% of men in the former Mongol Empire appears to originate from a single man who lived approximately 1,000 years ago, consistent with Genghis Khan's time and place. If this interpretation is correct, Genghis Khan's genetic legacy rivals his historical legacy, with 1 in 200 men on Earth carrying his DNA. Fact 56. The Secret History of the Mongols, written shortly after Genghis Khan's death, is the most important primary source for his life and the early Mongol Empire. Originally intended only for members of the royal family, this remarkable document combines historical narrative with folklore, poetry, and religious beliefs. It portrays Genghis Khan not as a distant conqueror, but as a flesh-and-blood human being with emotions, relationships, and personal struggles. The Secret History brings us as close as we can get to the man behind the legend. Fact 57. According to The Secret History, Genghis Khan's last words were advice for conquering the Jin dynasty of northern China, demonstrating that even on his deathbed, he was thinking of military strategy. He allegedly told his sons to use the Jin and Song dynasties against each other, playing on their mutual hostility to weaken both. His sons followed this advice, eventually conquering all of China. Even in death, Genghis Khan was shaping the course of history. Fact 58. The Mongol impact on world history extends far beyond their direct conquests. The destruction of the Islamic Caliphate at Baghdad in 1258 ended an era of Arab and Persian cultural dominance. The devastation of Central Asian cities shifted trade routes and altered economic patterns. The Mongol pressure on Eastern Europe influenced the development of Russia and contributed to the isolation that shaped Russian identity. The world after the Mongols was fundamentally different from the world before. Fact 59. The Mongol conquests accelerated the spread of technologies that would reshape the world. Gunpowder weapons, which the Chinese had developed but used primarily for fireworks and signals, spread westward along Mongol routes to the Middle East and eventually Europe. Printing technology spread similarly. These technologies would eventually enable European expansion and the modern world. The Mongols were not the inventors, but they were the vectors through which innovation spread. Fact 60. Rest now in the long shadow of history, where causes and effects stretch across centuries. The Mongol conquests seem remote, something that happened long ago to distant peoples. But the world you live in was shaped by those conquests in ways both obvious and subtle. The nations that exist today, the technologies we use, the ideas we think with, all have roots that extend back to the time when Mongol horses galloped across Eurasia. History is never really past. It is the ground on which we stand. Fact 61. Mongol women enjoyed more freedom and power than women in most contemporary societies. They managed households and herds when men were away at war, which was often. They could own property, divorce their husbands, and participate in political councils. Several women served as regents for the empire, wielding real power during the minorities of young khans. The story of the Mongol Empire is not only a story of men on horseback, but also of women who held families and even kingdoms together. Fact 62. TEMÜJIN Khatun, the widow of Ogedei Khan, ruled the Mongol Empire as regent from 1241 to 1246 CE, one of the most powerful women in medieval history. She maneuvered skillfully among factions to ensure that her son Gayuk was selected as the next great Khan. Her rule demonstrated that women could exercise supreme power in the Mongol system, even if such opportunities were exceptional. TEMÜJIN was ruthless in pursuing her goals, executing rivals, and building alliances. Fact 63. Sorgatani Beki, the wife of Talyui and mother of the Khans Monk and Kublai, was described by contemporary observers as the most intelligent woman in the world. A Nestorian Christian who also supported Buddhism and Islam, she educated her sons in multiple languages and cultures, preparing them for rule over a diverse empire. Her sons became the most successful of Genghis Khan's grandsons, and their achievements owed much to their mother's guidance. Sorgatani proves that the Mongol Empire was shaped by women as well as men. Fact 64. Mongol religion centered on the worship of the eternal blue heaven, called Tingri, and various nature spirits. Shamans served as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, performing rituals, healing the sick, and predicting the future. The Mongols believed that the spirits of ancestors watched over the living and that proper rituals were necessary to maintain their favor. This traditional religion coexisted with the various world religions that the Mongols encountered and often adopted. Fact 65. The Mongol openness to different religions was remarkable for its time. At the Mongol court, Buddhist monks debated with Nestorian Christian priests, Muslim scholars, and Taoist masters, all protected by Mongol law. William of Rubruck, a Franciscan friar who visited Mongolia in the 1250s, witnessed and participated in such debates. The Mongols listened to all sides with interest but ultimately declined to convert to any single faith, maintaining their traditional practices while respecting others. Fact 66. Let yourself drift now through the courts of the Khans, where representatives of every religion and every nation gathered under the vast Mongol sky. Merchants from Italy traded with merchants from China. Craftsmen from Persia worked alongside craftsmen from Russia. Languages mingled, ideas exchanged, and for a brief moment in history, the world was more connected than it had ever been before or would be again for centuries. This was the Pax Mongolica at its height, a brutal peace purchased at enormous cost, but peace nonetheless. Fact 67. The Mongol diet consisted primarily of meat and dairy products from their herds, supplemented by wild game and gathered plants. Kumis, fermented mare's milk, was the national drink, mildly alcoholic and nutritious. The Mongols preserved meat by drying it into a kind of jerky that could be stored indefinitely and reconstituted for eating. This portable, high-calorie diet allowed Mongol armies to travel without supply lines, living off their herds and the land. Diet was a military advantage. Fact 68. The Mongol gur, also called a yurt, was a portable dwelling perfectly adapted to nomadic life on the steppe. A lattice framework of wooden poles supported a felt covering that provided insulation against both summer heat and winter cold. A gur could be assembled or disassembled in an hour and transported on wagons or pack animals. The interior was organized according to tradition, with the hearth at the center and specific areas for different family members and activities. The gur was home, and home could move. Fact 69. Mongol society was organized around the concept of anda, or blood brotherhood, and other bonds of loyalty that connected individuals across family lines. TEMÜJIN's anda relationship with Jamukha was sealed by the exchange of gifts and a ceremony that created a bond considered as sacred as biological kinship. The nokur, or companion, was a warrior who swore personal loyalty to a leader, forming the core of military units. These bonds of personal loyalty were the glue that held Mongol society and the Mongol military together. Fact 70. The Mongol concept of just war differed from that of settled civilizations. To the Mongols, warfare was a natural activity, a way of life for a warrior people. The submission of other peoples to Mongol rule was divinely ordained, and those who resisted were rebels against heaven. This worldview justified both conquest and the severe punishment of those who resisted. From the Mongol perspective, their wars were not aggression, but the enforcement of cosmic order. Fact 71. The siege of Baghdad in 1258 CE was one of the most significant events of the Mongol conquests. Baghdad, seat of the Abbasid Caliphate and one of the greatest cities in the world, fell to the Mongol army under Genghis Khan. The last Abbasid caliph was executed, reportedly by being rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses. The city was sacked for weeks, with enormous loss of life and the destruction of libraries that contained irreplaceable manuscripts. Baghdad never recovered its former glory. Fact 72. Rest now in the ruins of ancient Baghdad, where the ghosts of scholars and poets wander through memories of a golden age. The House of Wisdom, which had translated the works of Greek philosophers and preserved the knowledge of ancient civilizations, was destroyed. Books were thrown into the Tigris, which reportedly ran black with ink and red with blood. Some knowledge was lost forever. Yet other knowledge survived, carried by refugees to other lands where it would eventually contribute to the European Renaissance. Fact 73. The Mongol impact on the Islamic world was profound and lasting. The destruction of the caliphate ended the political unity of Sunni Islam, which would never be restored. The devastation of Central Asian cities shifted the center of Islamic civilization from Persia and Iraq to Egypt and later Turkey. The trauma of the Mongol invasions became a reference point in Islamic historical memory, a catastrophe against which later disasters were measured. Yet the Mongols who remained in Islamic lands eventually converted, adding their martial traditions to Islamic civilization. Fact 74. The Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 CE was one of the most significant battles in world history, marking the first major Mongol defeat in open battle. A Mamluk army from Egypt, led by the general Baybars, met a Mongol force in Palestine and decisively defeated it. This victory demonstrated that the Mongols could be beaten and prevented them from conquering Egypt and North Africa. Ain Jalut preserved Islamic power in the Middle East and halted Mongol expansion westward. Fact 75. The Mamluks who defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut were themselves products of the steppe. Originally slave soldiers purchased from Turkish and Caucasian peoples, the Mamluks had learned horsemanship and archery in the same traditions as the Mongols. They fought fire with fire, defeating steppe tactics with steppe tactics. The victory at Ain Jalut showed that the Mongols were not invincible when facing opponents who understood their methods and matched their military skills. Fact 76. The Mongol invasion of Japan in 1274 and 1281 CE represented the limits of Mongol power. Despite assembling one of the largest amphibious invasion forces in history, the Mongols failed to conquer Japan. The first invasion was repelled by Japanese resistance and a storm. The second invasion ended when a massive typhoon, the famous kamikaze, destroyed much of the Mongol fleet. Japan was saved by divine intervention, according to Japanese belief, and remained independent of Mongol rule. Fact 77. The failed invasions of Japan had profound effects on Japanese history and identity. The belief that the kamikaze typhoons were sent by the gods to protect Japan reinforced Japanese exceptionalism and the concept of Japan as a sacred land under divine protection. The samurai who had fought the Mongols gained prestige and political power. The costs of defense contributed to economic problems that would eventually bring down the Kamakura shogunate. The Mongol threat reshaped Japan, even though the Mongols never conquered it. Fact 78. Let your mind rest now on the shores of Japan, where Mongol ships never landed, where divine winds scattered the invaders across the sea. Some places escaped the Mongol conquests, whether by geography, luck, or successful resistance. Western Europe, Southeast Asia, Japan, Egypt, India beyond the northwest, all remained unconquered. The Mongol Empire was vast but not universal. Even the Great Khan could not rule everywhere. Fact 79. The Chagatai Khanate, which ruled Central Asia, was perhaps the most traditionally Mongol of the successor states. Its rulers maintained the nomadic lifestyle and military traditions of their ancestors longer than the other khanates. The Chagatai domains were eventually divided between a western portion that became increasingly Persianized and Muslim and an eastern portion that maintained Mongol traditions longer. From the Chagatai inheritance came Tamerlane, who briefly revived Mongol power in the 14th century. Fact 80. The legacy of the Mongol Empire includes the nations that arose from its fragments. The Golden Horde's legacy shaped Russia and the Central Asian states. The Ilkhanate's legacy influenced Iran and Iraq. The Yuan dynasty's legacy persists in Chinese memory. The Chagatai Khanate's legacy extends to modern Central Asian nations. The boundaries drawn by Mongol conquests and divisions continue to influence political geography today, 8 centuries after Genghis Khan's death. Fact 81. Mongol loanwords in various languages attest to the empire's lasting influence. Words like horde, Khan, and kumis entered European languages through contact with the Mongols. Persian, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian all contain Mongol borrowings. These linguistic traces preserve the memory of a time when Mongol words were spoken from Korea to Poland, when the language of the steppe was the language of power across much of the known world. Fact 82. The Mongol Empire's communication systems were among the most efficient in the pre-modern world. The Yam postal system could transmit messages across the empire in days rather than the months required by ordinary travel. Merchants and diplomats traveling on official business received food, lodging, and fresh horses at relay stations. This system allowed the empire to function despite its enormous size, enabling coordination that would otherwise have been impossible. Fact 83. The famous traveler Ibn Battuta, who explored much of the known world in the 14th century, traveled extensively in territories once ruled or still influenced by the Mongols. His accounts describe the aftermath of Mongol rule in Central Asia, Persia, India, and China. Ibn Battuta witnessed both the destruction caused by Mongol conquests and the recovery that followed, the cities rebuilt, and the trade restored. His travels were possible because of the connections the Mongols had created. Fact 84. The Mongol period saw significant advances in cartography, as rulers needed accurate maps to govern their vast domains. Maps produced during the Mongol era showed more of Asia with greater accuracy than any previous European or Islamic maps. This geographical knowledge contributed to the European age of exploration, as travelers like Marco Polo and missionaries like William of Rubruck brought back information about lands previously unknown to the West. Fact 85. Rest now in the vastness of the map, where the Mongol Empire sprawls across continents, touching the Pacific and nearly touching the Atlantic. No empire before or since has controlled so much contiguous territory. From the frozen forests of Siberia to the tropical seas of Southeast Asia, from the borders of Poland to the islands of Korea, the Mongol writ ran. This was the world that Genghis Khan and his successors made, a world transformed by horses and arrows and iron will. Fact 86. The environmental impact of the Mongol conquests may have been significant. Some scholars have suggested that the massive depopulation caused by Mongol warfare allowed forests to regrow on abandoned farmland, potentially absorbing enough carbon dioxide to affect global climate. While this theory remains controversial, it illustrates the scale of Mongol impact. The conquests were so devastating that their effects might have reached even into the atmosphere. Fact 87. The paper money introduced by the Mongols in China and later in Persia was one of the first attempts to establish fiat currency backed by government authority. The Yuan dynasty's paper currency eventually collapsed due to overprinting and inflation, but the concept survived. The Mongol experience with paper money contributed to the development of modern financial systems, demonstrating both the possibilities and the dangers of government-issued currency. Fact 88. Mongol art and material culture blended influences from across the empire. Chinese silk, Persian metalwork, Russian furs, and Central Asian textiles all featured in Mongol elite culture. The synthesis produced distinctive styles that influenced art across Eurasia. Mongol patronage supported artists, craftsmen, and architects from many traditions, creating a cosmopolitan culture that transcended any single ethnic or religious identity. Fact 89. The Mongol script, derived from the Uyghur alphabet, remains in use in Inner Mongolia, part of China. Today, one of the few direct cultural continuities from the empire. Genghis Khan commissioned this script to write the Mongol language, which had previously been unwritten. The existence of a written language helped unify Mongol identity and enabled administration of the empire. Literature in Mongol, including the secret history, preserves the voice of the conquerors themselves. Fact 90. The decline of the Mongol successor states followed different paths in different regions. The Golden Horde fragmented into smaller khanates that were eventually absorbed by Russia. The Ilkhanate collapsed in the 14th century, with successor states fighting over its remains. The Yuan dynasty was overthrown by Chinese rebels. The Chagatai Khanate divided and weakened over time. By 1500, no Mongol state remained a major power, though descendants of Genghis Khan continued to rule smaller domains for centuries. Fact 91. Let the empires fade now, as all empires must. The Mongol Empire lasted barely a century in its unified form, less than 2 centuries, even counting the successor states. Yet its impact persists. The world was reshaped by the Mongol conquests, and that reshaping is still with us. The rise of Moscow, the isolation of Russia, the fall of the Caliphate, the spread of gunpowder, the connections across Eurasia, all trace back to the time when the horsemen of the steppe ruled half the world. Fact 92. Modern Mongolia, with a population of only 3 million, cherishes its imperial heritage. Genghis Khan represents not just historical greatness, but national identity, the symbol of a small people who once dominated much larger nations. Mongolian children learn of his achievements, Mongolian wrestlers compete in his name, and Mongolian artists depict his legend. For Mongolia, Genghis Khan is not just past glory, but present inspiration. Fact 93. The question of how to remember Genghis Khan divides historians and publics. To emphasize his military genius, his legal innovations, and his role in connecting civilizations? Or to emphasize the millions who died, the cities that burned, the cultures that were destroyed? Perhaps both perspectives are necessary, holding in mind simultaneously the achievements and the costs. History rarely offers simple heroes or simple villains, and Genghis Khan is certainly not simple. Fact 94. The Mongol Empire demonstrates both the possibilities and the limits of conquest. Genghis Khan and his successors built the largest land empire in history through military brilliance and strategic vision. But they could not hold what they had taken. The empire fragmented within generations, leaving successor states that eventually collapsed in their turn. Military power can create empires. It cannot sustain them indefinitely. All conquests are temporary. All empires fall. Fact 95. Rest now in the wisdom of impermanence. The greatest empire the world has ever seen is gone, its rulers dust, its armies disbanded, its provinces divided among successor nations that have themselves risen and fallen. Only the land remains, the endless steppe where Genghis Khan was born, where Mongol herders still follow their flocks as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. The grass grows, the wind blows, and history continues its eternal cycles. Fact 96. The legacy of Genghis Khan is woven into the fabric of the modern world in ways we rarely recognize. The political boundaries of Eurasia still reflect Mongol conquests and divisions. The cultural mixing the Mongols enabled shaped the civilizations that followed. The technologies they spread transformed warfare and society. The trauma they inflicted shaped historical memory and national identity. We are all, in some sense, living in a world the Mongols made. Fact 97. In the end, what do we learn from Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire? Perhaps that history is made by human choices, for good and ill. Perhaps that power is always temporary, no matter how absolute it seems. Perhaps that connections between peoples bring both benefit and danger. Perhaps that judgment across centuries is difficult, and humility is appropriate when assessing the past. The Mongols challenge our assumptions and complicate our categories. Fact 98. As sleep approaches, let the thunder of hooves fade to silence. The Mongol armies have returned to the steppe of memory, their conquests complete, their empire dissolved. The great Khan lies in his hidden tomb, surrounded by treasures that no one has seen for 8 centuries. The grass grows over battlefields where millions died. Time heals even the deepest wounds, smooths even the sharpest edges. What remains is story, and story is what we make of it. Fact 99. Sleep now, traveler, beneath the eternal blue heaven that watched over the Mongols and watches over you. The same stars that guided Genghis Khan's armies across continents shine over your rest tonight. History is long, and we are small, but we are part of it, connected to all who came before and all who will come after. The steppe wind whispers ancient secrets, and if you listen carefully, you might hear the echo of hooves on the endless grass, carrying riders toward horizons we will never see. Rest well, and may your dreams be vast as the empire of the Khans.
Close your eyes now.
The warriors have dismounted. The campfires are burning low. The horses stand quietly, heads bowed, dreaming their own dreams of endless galloping. Somewhere in the darkness, a throat singer is chanting the old songs, the songs of conquest and loss, of glory and dust. The Mongol Empire sleeps, and you sleep with it, held in the arms of history, rocked by the rhythms of the ages. Tomorrow the world will wake and continue its turning. But for now, there is only peace, only silence, only the breath of the wind across the grass, and the long, slow heartbeat of time.